I have a very funny Ram Dass story if you want to hear it.
Oh, I would love to.
So I was at Dan Goldman's house as a teenager with Hanuman, and him and I were tripping on acid at his dad's house and on summer
Nice.
vacation. And I went upstairs to like make some tea or like get something to eat. I forget. I was like, I'm gonna go upstairs. He goes, just so you know, my dad's friend is here. You might run into him. My dad's friend Ram Dass, and I have no idea who this is. I'm like, yeah, I'm not really worried about your dad's friend Ram Dass, like whatever. So I'm in the kitchen doing what I'm doing, and Ram Dass comes in. And I have this. I wish I had I wish I had a recording of the conversation. I have no idea what we talked about, but I know we talked for a long time, and I know that he knew I was tripping.
Yeah.
And all I remember was going downstairs, and my friend's like, "Where you been?" I was like, "Yeah." And I go, "I met your dad's friend." I go, "He's weird."
This is the way, Green Beret, where warriors talk about the weight they've carried.
Okay, welcome back to another edition of the Awake Green Beret podcast. We have a very special guest with us today, somebody who I'm really looking forward to talking to. That's Mr. Dave Smith. Dave is a meditation instructor, and I'll let him explain the Dharma part to you. But before we begin, just a really quick word from our sponsors. As you know, I hit it every time. Olipop, this really helped me with my struggle with sodas. It got me off the sugary sodas. It got me off the artificial sweeteners. Good for your gut health, good for serotonin production, plant-based, etc. Next, we have Larabelle and the Crazy Tree, which is written, co-authored by my wife and I. It's a story about authenticity, about embracing your crazy, especially when you're going through that adolescent phase. We have two granddaughters who live with us, and it's geared towards that age. And then finally, from Green Beret to shamanism, one man's journey to heal. This is my story of my struggle, the abyss that PTSD put me into, how I climbed out. And part 3 is one man's journey to heal, a little bit about what I learned along that path to healing. So I'll conclude there and turn it over to Dave for a more comprehensive introduction.
Thanks, Matthew. Appreciate it. Yeah, my name's Dave Smith. I live in Western Colorado, and I am a Buddhist Dharma teacher, mindfulness and emotional intelligence trainer, and I've worked in substance abuse treatment for 15 or 20 years or so. So really just kind of coming at everything with mostly a contemplative, philosophical framework on how to deal with things, and kind of leaning into some of the clinical stuff, some of the therapeutic stuff, but really more the philosophical. How do we navigate our struggles without having it being such a problem solution mentality, and trying to find mostly ways that are contemplative or meditative. Yeah. And so all things that fit in that package. I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of it a little bit more.
We will. And again, just from the start, I just want to say, like, this resonates with me on such a deep level because, as most of you know, my journey involved plant medicine, but I look for every opportunity to remind the audience that it's not about the plant medicine. It's about using the plant medicine to get off of the merry-go-round long enough to get to these long-term solutions where I see there's a lot of intersection with the philosophical and the Buddhist traditions and different mindfulness practices. So I couldn't be more excited for this podcast. So first question I have for you, Dave, is, can you share your personal story? What drew you to meditation and Dharma in the first place, and how that evolved into teaching?
Yeah, that's a big question. It goes way back. I didn't grow up around this stuff. As you and I were talking before we hit record, my dad's a Vietnam vet, and I grew up in the 80s north of Boston in kind of a John Hughes world, classic 80s. My dad had a construction business. It was mostly motorcycles and Budweiser and parties at the pool, and really kind of a fun upbringing for the most part. My sister was killed in a car accident when I was 11, which really made things really challenging for my parents, and even more so for me. So from like 12, from like my teen years were really kind of a nightmare. I was already getting caught up in drugs and alcohol, and really just kind of had no interest in the world, felt lost. And then really I got kind of, I guess you could say, lucky. My parents lost their house and their business, and we had to move in with my grandparents in Western Mass. So we had to move from southern New Hampshire to western Massachusetts. And just by happenstance, I ended up becoming friends with this kid named Hanuman Goleman, whose dad is Dan Goleman, the kind of famous emotional intelligence writer. He wrote the book Emotional Intelligence in 1995. And then at that point, I got introduced to all kinds of things I normally would have never been into. His dad was one of the first mindfulness practitioners. He was friends with people like Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg and Ram Dass. So I got introduced.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I'd be at his dad's house, and like these are the people who would be there. Very different than my dad's friends.
Well, even right from the jump, when you said that Hanuman, I was like, like that
Yeah,
caught me because for those
sure.
of you who don't know, and I post about that quite a bit, but Hanuman is one of my favorite of the Buddhist, I guess we'd call deities. And I love the quote from Hanuman about, his relationship with God. So let me see if I can say it without butchering it. But Hanuman says that when I forget who I am, I serve God. And when I remember who I am God. Is that
Nice.
close?
It might be. I don't know actually much about Hanuman. I know he's a Hindu god of mischief.
Yeah.
And so, we became friends. So I got introduced to that kind of segment of the population early on. I didn't, I wasn't that interested. I just kind of thought his dad had wrote a book called The Meditative Mind. And I was like, this is just, and one thing I did notice, I will have to say about his dad and all those folks, is they were just so kind.
Hmm.
And they didn't treat me like other kids' parents did. They were really, really friendly and really kind and interesting. They were just like sort of like really nice to be around.
Yeah.
And then after a couple of years of kind of being in that space, I got within another car accident. I was in a car accident with a girlfriend of mine, and we were walking in a cornfield, and we got ran over by a drunk driver.
Holy
And
cow.
so I flipped over the car. She got ran over by a car, and it was just this horrific, gory police, ambulance, like total nightmare. And then after that, I would say I was kind of in a dissociative PTS state for a couple months. And then Hanuman's mom, who
Yeah.
also was one of these people who went to India in the 70s and practiced with Neem Karoli Baba and Goenka, wanted me to meet her friend who was a Dharma teacher. And I was like, okay, I'll talk. I didn't know what that meant, but I'd met some Dharma teachers, so so I was like, okay, I'll talk to your friend. And that was really when it all began for me. I was 18. It was the fall of '93, and I met this guy Steve Smith, who I just saw in Thailand last week. Who was, he was a Buddhist monk for many years under Sayadaw U Pandita, and he was really steeped in the Burmese tradition and was teaching. At that point, was kind of the main teacher at the 3-month retreat at IMS. And we spent the
Hmm.
morning together just kind of talking about what I'd gone through. And he talked about his experience as being a monk and kind of talked about Buddhism, really probably more specifically the Dharma. I'm sure we'll get into the difference there. And taught me mindfulness meditation and invited me over to the hall and just taught me the basic, you pay attention to your breathing and your mind wanders and you bring it back and all the stuff that we all know and have done a million times. But for
Hmm.
me, it was truly profound because it gave me some relief. It gave me a break because I was just living in my mind. I was in fear and confusion and anger and grief. And to me, the world was just a place I didn't really want to be.
Yeah.
I didn't. I was 18. I looked at the future. Kids were going to college and getting excited about stuff. I looked at the world and I was just like, I don't really think there's anything here for me.
Mm.
And so having that experience, that first initial experience to mindfulness changed that for me in a big way. Where I thought, it wasn't enlightened. I wasn't enlightened. I just had this kind of faith that maybe I'd be okay, and that maybe there was just another way of being in the world that I got introduced to that was so profound that I just kind of was like, okay, like it shifted the tides for me. So that was really my initial introduction into that. It was pretty profound. I don't think a lot of people have the level of intensity that I had like right at the beginning,
Yeah. No.
so
And
that really got me invested.
I imagine that some of that intensity was probably shaped just by the concentration of, like, I guess what I would call like sort of ground zero in some of that meditation, mindfulness, and Buddhist practice. You
Yeah.
found yourself just in the vicinity of physical vicinity.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there was this thing called present time experience. Really nothing, I don't think, that profound in the Buddhist tradition. It's just waking up to the phenomenological world, like the in breath, the out breath, the sounds of the birds, the sunlight on your skin, the just here-ness. And what I think I touched into was I was like, right here in this present moment, actually, I'm okay right now.
Yes. I love
Like,
that. I can't, yeah, I express that enough, just how much that present moment really is. Well, it's all that exists, first of all, and second of all, it's where all of all of our anxiety and fears either live in the past or the future.
it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, so that wakening to what we would probably call the Dharma, the kind of a different perspective on just experience, was enough to ignite some kind of seeking within me, some kind of light, some very deep interest of like, oh, like what the hell is this? This seems good, and then kind of been following that for 32 years with varying degrees of success.
Well, I think 32 years would define success. And so you ultimately you began to teach, and that's where you are now. Is you teach that, and you also run retreats as well.
I do, yeah. Now, don't forget, there was, it was a long, rocky road. I mean, this was 93. Now, I didn't get sober till 2003. So
Okay.
I had a 10-year period where I was still not convinced. I was also because I was kind of put back together a little bit. I played in bands, and I actually was in a very successful ska punk band, and I toured a bunch. And so, I was drinking in the bars and running my mouth and doing kind of this rock star thing. But then I was going to sit these 10-day retreats. For 10 years, I kind of was double life a little bit, because I was actually finally like enjoying the world. It was really kind of the paradox is meditation gave me this stability to start appreciating the world. So I was like, oh, maybe it's not so bad here after all. So I kind of was living in the world, experimenting and doing this meditation practice. So I didn't get sober till 2003. So that was 10 years of back and forth. And then I didn't really start teaching till about 8 years after that. So it wasn't like I found it and jumped right in.
Sure.
It was a long, rocky road. But really for the last, I would say 15 years, I've been pretty steeped in what I do now.
Lovely. I appreciate it. How did your early experiences and insights with meditation shape your worldview or approach to human suffering? Since we've already, I guess, cataloged a little bit of your own personal human
Yeah.
suffering.
It's funny you ask this question, because it's like, I'm going to provide a very un-Buddhist answer. And it's what I would call the paradox of suffering. And so the thing about meeting Stephen Smith and meeting a Dharma teacher that was so profound was, first of all, he was the first adult I ever met in my life who I felt like wasn't lying to me. And when I told him all the suffering I'd been through, my sister dying and getting in this tragic accident and death and loss and all that stuff, he kind of reflected it back to me as if it was kind of a very normal thing. Like a kind of like, yeah, this is what it's like in the human realm. He reframed my suffering in a positive light, saying, yeah, you've been through such hard things. You've seen how dark things can get for people in this world, that actually there's a lot of wisdom that comes from that. Because when we really touch into real suffering, it actually shakes us in a way where we maybe start to question how we want to live. Maybe life isn't all about chasing pleasure and pushing away pain and just trying to make money, and the whole capitalistic American system. Like that was all bullshit. Like that actually, true happiness was an inside job, just like true suffering is an inside job. It just depends on how it goes. So that really provided me a lot of relief. I was like, oh, okay. And so it was kind of like, oh, suffering's like kind of universal.
Right, right. I actually posted something yesterday. I think I said that essentially that the constant suffering is in just another form of delusion as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So, and then you get interested in Buddhism, and then Buddhism, as you probably know, like does practice or promises kind of, if you do the Buddhist thing, it'll come to the end of suffering, which I actually don't agree with. So then I was in this weird parallel. I was like, well, wait a minute, like this acknowledgement of suffering is really what really helped me. Now you're telling me I need to put it to an end?
Mm.
Like, wait a minute, that doesn't add up for me. So I struggled with that for years and years, until I really started working with a teacher named Stephen Batchelor, who kind of
Mm.
reframes what are called the Four Noble Truths.
Yeah.
So But for me, suffering it's the whole point. It's the whole damn thing.
Wow. Okay. And I think for some people hearing that for the first time, that probably sounds a little bit scary or a little bit, like you said, I think that a lot of us are raised in this capitalist mindset of wanting to earn, hoard, amass different things, accolades, achievements, while, like you said, simultaneously pushing away the pain and suffering.
Yeah.
And so that could probably, for some listening right now, I feel like maybe sound very confronting. If you're okay with it, can I
Yeah,
maybe
sure.
share my perspective on that? I agree with you, and I agree, but just slightly reframed in the sense that I believe that those are our most profound teachers, those sufferings. And that is why we're here, is to learn and to grow. And so, yeah, I absolutely see it that way too, that it's to be embraced and experienced.
That's right. Yeah, it's not to be put to an end, and so it is. It's just kind of Buddhism sort of declared a war on suffering. American society has declared a war on emotions. And if you and I hadn't been through the suffering we've been through, we wouldn't even be talking right. We'd have nothing to talk about.
No, we wouldn't.
And I think that the scam of modern society is happiness is like things are going my way and I'm getting what I want. And that's not on offer. Like, you can't just have that. Like, that's not. So there's your delusion you pointed to earlier. It's like we run for happiness, not even knowing what it is, because we're being promised that it's an outside job. And so, the thing that I really think about lately is Buddhism talks a lot about wisdom, which is another tricky word. But really, for me, it's about meaning. It's about having a meaningful life.
Yeah,
And having a meaningful life doesn't mean that I'm necessarily like, if you actually interview somebody who really feels like their life is meaningful, and you ask somebody who's really living a meaningful life, are you happy? They don't even know they're like, am I happy? They're like, I don't know, I guess. They're like, I don't even think about that anymore
right.
because
Yeah,
I've transformed the pain. And you're like, it's everything I've been through is so important that I wouldn't want to get rid of any of it.
absolutely. I've had a number of really challenging relationship problems in my life. And I'm at a place now where I'm in a very healthy relationship. And I look back and I wouldn't trade those challenging relationships for anything, because those of what were prepared me to finally be in a healthy relationship. And I couldn't
Yeah.
be here if it wasn't for that.
Well, that's right. It's like the gestalt. They say the
Yeah.
whole is greater or different than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
And like, you couldn't be you if you subtracted anything from the past out. You wouldn't actually be you.
True.
So why would you want to? So it's a silly game.
It sure is. Yeah.
It's a silly game. You
And so
know.
many play it though, and that's the interesting part, and that's the invitation for those listening and hearing these concepts for the first time, is learning to be okay with the here and now, learning to be okay with pain and suffering. In fact, again, back to the plant medicine thing, like I will advocate all day long that it's only an exit off of the insanity that we're on. It's or more or less maybe a lane change into learning how to embrace these different practices of these
Yeah.
philosophies and mindfulness and different things like that, to be okay with whatever life throws at you.
Well, I mean, you're saying the same thing they said, right? Like, this is what Ram Dass said about acid in the '60s. Like, can offer you a doorway into a different perspectival acknowledgement, but you got to walk through the door. Pete, that's where I think the confusion around it is it's not the psychedelic experience, it's what you do with it that actually matters.
Precisely, precisely. Yeah, actually, I don't know if you can see it, but right over my shoulder there, I have a
Yeah.
picture of Ram Dass.
Nice.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
a huge influence in my life.
Well, I have a very funny Ram Dass story if you want to hear it.
Oh, I would love to.
So I was at Dan Goldman's house as a teenager with Hanuman, and him and I were tripping on acid at his dad's house and on summer
Nice.
vacation. And I went upstairs to make some tea or get something to eat. I forget. I was like, I'm gonna go upstairs. He goes, just so you know, my dad's friend is here. You might run into him. My dad's friend Ram Dass. And I have no idea who this is. I'm like, yeah, I'm not really worried about your dad's friend Ram Dass, like whatever. So I'm in the kitchen doing what I'm doing, and Ram Dass comes in. And I have this. I wish I had I wish I had a recording of the conversation. I have no idea what we talked about, but I know we talked for a long time, and I know that he knew I was tripping.
Yeah.
And all I remember was going downstairs, and my friend's like, "Where you been?" I was like, "Yeah." I go, I met your dad's friend. I go, "He's weird." So I think he just like literally blew my mind.
Well, that reminds me of a similar experience I had one time when I was tripping on acid, and I sat down with it was at a festival, and there was this gentleman who was a PhD in quantum physics.
Boy.
And we just sat down and we started having this conversation, and he wasn't tripping and I was tripping, but we were saying the same things, and he was discussing it from
Okay.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and so I would almost be willing to bet that Rom knew you were tripping and was having fun with you.
I'm sure he totally was at my expense. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. So what does secular Dharma mean to you, and how does it differ from, like, say, traditional or Buddhist or secular mindfulness?
Oh, great question. Yeah. Well, I was very like at first, I worked with Stephen Batchelor. He kind of introduced this idea of secular Buddhism, which I actually always kind of pushed back a little bit because I was like, I don't really want to secularize Buddhism. Buddhism's fine. Let's just leave Buddhism alone, you know. But the Dharma, which is sort of what the Buddha taught, which really lies at the heart of the tradition, how do we, um, you know, I think the Dharma is a secular perspective anyway. So what does that
Mhm,
actually mean? Um, Secular does not mean anti-religious
mhm.
at all. People, that's a big confusion. It's not either you're religious or you're secular. Secularity is an open-mindedness that's tolerant for religion, but is rooted a little bit more in like we would say like the three pillars of secularity would be like, the goal of secularity is to improve the quality of life for everybody on the planet,
Yeah,
regardless. Like let's make things better for everybody.
sure.
If we're going to trust anything, if we're going to put trust in anything, probably science would be the thing to trust the most. And that it's good, to do good things, to be kind, to be generous is good. And so what that does is it just kind of strips away, and everybody's perspective is different. What I do with secular Dharma is I strip away the stuff that get added on later, the metaphysics, the karma, the rebirth, anything that has a kind of past, future life, mystical, hard to explain overtone.
Mhm.
I just politely put that aside and say, okay, I don't know about that. Maybe let's just put that over here. And
Yeah,
looking at it in a secular sense. I mean, the word secular from the Greek really means this time, this place. The secular world is the world that you and I live in right now.
yeah.
And
Well, it
so
it sounds like
that
it's just another way of saying be here now.
it really is. It really is. And so it's concerned with this world, this life, the struggles and the challenges that we face here and now. And so what I try not to do, and I think I've done a fairly good job, is also being careful that we don't turn secular Dharma into just another different kind of ideology.
Mhm.
So we really think about it more as a dialogue of like looking at the early Buddhist teachings with like looking at them a little bit more critically, watching out for like who has the right interpretation of these texts. It's really meant to be more of a dialogue in an investigation. Then the secular mindfulness stuff. I think Buddhism doesn't like secular mindfulness, and I think that's been a mistake. I think it's a good thing because what that does is, I mean, if mindfulness wasn't secularized, it wouldn't have reached those veterans in the PTSD programs.
True.
What secularity does is it gives us entrance points into parts of the population where it would normally be frowned upon. So really
Yeah.
what it does is it just gives you access.
Yeah, I love that, and I agree with you. I think that it would have been highly shunned if it hadn't been secular by the veteran community, and not just the veteran community, but, what I like to term as the lost masculine. I really don't like the term, toxic masculine, but yeah, but like, I do like, I coined the phrase or use the phrase, the lost masculine, because that's where I was when I was going through some of my deepest struggles, is I was just simply lost and I did not know where to turn.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and so I bow down to John Kabat-Zinn and people who are smart enough, even Goldman, who are smart enough to say, okay, this mindfulness thing is powerful. It's going to be, they were just smart. They're like, it's going to be a lot more effective if we take it out of its Buddhist packaging. That's going to give us inroads into education, into therapy, into clinical realms, into the government. So mindfulness has made its way into a lot of agencies that never would have been allowed in the room, especially school, right?
Yeah,
Like church and state, right? So I think it was just a brilliant move by doing that.
yeah,
And there's nothing sort of un-Buddhist about it. It's just again, you kind of get into that debate. So for me, it's all about like, what do I have to do to have the biggest impact on as many people as possible? And
Yeah.
like, if I have to use different words or like, I don't care. Like,
Right.
actually, I don't even have to. I don't even care if I have to be dishonest. Like,
Mm.
what's more important, helping more people or like being true? It's like, I don't care about all that. Like, I want to help as many people as possible, and if I have to craft and shape my language a little bit to do so, then I'm more than willing to do that.
You know, the other thing I really love about this too, when when essentially said that that it's a conversation at the core, is it reminds me, like when I left organized religion originally, I went into a very deep agnostic phase, but I still had intellectual curiosity about this. So I fell, or not fell, but I pursued a more philosophical route,
Yeah.
specifically Stoicism.
Yeah, sure.
And right there, right? Like, Stoicism was born out, again, for those that don't know, Stoicism was born out of a conversation in a garden in the town square in ancient Greece
Yeah.
where every man could espouse his ideas or philosophies, and they were part of the conversation. And if they held water, then they were kept. And if they were proven to be ineffectual, they were thrown out. And that's where
Yeah.
Stoicism was born.
Well, look at Stoicism, so popular now for very good
Yeah.
reasons. Like early Stoicism and early Buddhism are like almost saying the same damn thing,
Right.
you
Which
know? And
brings up another really good point to me. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a spiritual practice, a philosophical, or whatever. When we strip it all down, the things that are really truly true and hold water and effective all reside together. There is no fighting going on.
that's right. That's right. Yep. That's definitely right. That's why the conversational piece and even trying to package things like saying it's philosophical but not religious. As soon as you start using words, you start creating problems. You know what I mean? But we have to use words. But
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think Stoicism is, I read an article recently that said more books were sold on Stoicism in the last year than the last 50 years.
Wow. Wow. I didn't know that. And
Yeah,
I
it's
don't,
like really growing, man. It's catching on.
yeah, my Stoicism phase was, 19, 20, 21. So those 3 years, I don't even know how I really stumbled upon it, but I did, and I had a practice, at the time I was living in North Carolina, and so I would drive to the beach on a Saturday, camp overnight, and then all day I would sit at the beach and study Stoicism,
That's
and,
awesome.
yeah, it was beautiful. I actually have a tattoo, with Stoicism tattoo. That I
Nice.
Yeah, but all right, anyway, how do you reconcile, well, I think we've already kind of discussed this, but let me just ask it for good measure. How do you reconcile secular frameworks like science and, psychology with the contemplative insights that have spiritual roots? And I think we already kind of covered that, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think it does. I think what it does is it's just having more of an open minded and not getting in the tricky business of like one is better than the other or this Buddhism is better than that Buddhism. Not having that the correct language because I would say secularity would include, the word that we would use here probably would be the most bang for the buck would be contemplative traditions. And the world
Mm,
over is filled with, there's Hindu. There's Buddhist, there's Christian, almost every school has their type of contemplative work. I would just say the Buddhists really, they double down more than everybody did on that stuff. So I would make the claim that theirs is kind of the best because that's what they've been doing for 2,500 years. But it's all that anytime we invite our mind into that kind of a contemplative space, I think for the most part, just good things happen.
yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and for those of you who are maybe just barely beginning to familiarize yourself with Buddhism, what I like to tell people, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, is one of the things that I really love about Buddhism is that it is not a religion, that it's a life practice, that you can be a Christian Buddhist or a Muslim Buddhist or an atheist Buddhist. Your
Yeah,
thoughts?
sure. Well, the short answer to the question is Buddhism a religion? The only answer is yes and no.
Yep. Yeah.
For some people, it is. For Buddhist monks around the world, these guys who just marched to Washington, for a lot of people, Buddhism is a religious thing. For a
Yeah.
lot of people, it's not. The good thing about it is it's up to you.
I love that. That's a great answer.
It's your choice.
Yeah.
It certainly it adopts well into religion. For some people, they don't like. I'm not interested in that word, although I'm kind of more open minded to it lately. But yeah, the short answer is yes and no, and it's a set of practices. So there are people like I have students who are Christians. It fits into any box you want to put it in,
Yeah. Or not.
or not.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
Schrodinger's cat, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, even the Dalai Lama, if you ask him what his religion is, he always says, "My religion is kindness."
Yeah, I love that. That's true.
And you'd be hard pressed to find a religion that would actually disagree with that statement, I think.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, that and I love that statement. I've borrowed that a time or two as well.
Yeah,
Like sometimes when I'm asked like what religion I am, I'll say I am all of them to the
yeah,
extent of the practice of the true principles within them.
that's right.
Yeah, I mean at times I very align with Christian ideology or Buddhist ideology or the Tao or animism,
Sure.
paganism. Like I
Yeah.
don't want to be put in a box either.
No, as soon as you put yourself in a box, it just creates conflict.
Oh, yeah. And what's interesting is like what's coming through for me right now. And it's come through in a few moments in the conversation is the idea that like a lot of times when we begin to identify or label ourselves, what we're really doing is reinforcing the ego, which is
True.
right. And so what I've been hearing like in the back of my mind as we've talked about this is that when society or philosophies or practices begin to put themselves in box, it's almost like a collective ego is being reinforced.
It is, and the problem is we're not going to be able to put an end to this. So it's like, it's the problem with identity. It's like, okay, if I identify as a Buddhist and you identify as a Christian, now we're already different.
Yeah, yeah.
And built right into that difference is some degree of, well, you think this and I think that, therefore there's conflict. And so, and if you look at the world, I mean, this is good. This is on steroids, Republican, Democrat, it's just like it's the identity politics has really gotten to the point now where it's like, it's also not really fair to to not identify. So
Mhm.
it's just kind of, probably the work that you do when people ask you that. If I'm at a cookout, in my little town in Colorado, and someone asks me what I do, or they ask me about religion, I'm immediately like, oh shit, here we
Here
go.
we go. Yeah.
It's like,
Well,
so
I live in Utah.
yeah. So you have to just be skillful in how you work with that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. That's great input. I feel like this next question we've touched on a little bit as well, but I'm going to throw it out just in case. In your dialogue with thinkers like Stephen Batchelor, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about secular Dharma?
think I think a lot of people, it's an interesting concept. There's a lot of pushback. I think mostly what it is that people don't. I think the word is vastly misunderstood. And I think the big problem when I pointed out to just name it again, is like secularity. Secular is not anti-religious.
Yeah.
It's religious tolerance, and so I think that that's the one thing I try to remind people is that it's all inclusive, actually.
And ironically, I think we would say that, and I don't mean to be starting any controversy in the comments here, but it would almost say that religion is anti-secular, whereas secular is inclusive of religion.
See, I think that's safe.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive into what is emotional intelligence and why is it such
Right.
a central part of your teaching? And yeah, we can really go a long ways with this one.
I'm glad you asked because I think it's really important. First of all, like, what is emotional intelligence? First of all, it's being intelligent about your emotions. It's knowing when you've become emotional. It's actually a skill that it sounds good on paper, but once you start to acquire emotional intelligence, learning emotional intelligence is very painful. Learning how to embody things like shame or disgust or anger. I mean, for the most part, human beings are not interested in emotional intelligence.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
And so Buddhism doesn't do a great job of it. That's why I applaud Danny Goleman's work, because he and others have done a really good job of bringing it to the forefront. It's really about the short metric on that is, in terms of having autonomy and personal freedom, awareness plus choice equals freedom. So the real
Mhm.
metric is being able to choose how you respond when you've become emotional. Somebody
Mhm.
pisses you off and you're super angry. Do you choose how you respond, or do you just react? you
Well,
know?
if I may, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there's three possible responses or choices there. There's react, which I guess really isn't a choice. It's habit maybe.
Yeah,
Then
there's
there's response where we slow it down and we think through better alternatives versus being so habitual and so quick to react. And then third, and I think this is more in line with Ram Dass, is where we observe.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
that's a good metric. I mean, the real metric, that's a good metric. I like what you're saying because react response is really used in a lot of clinic. It's a great explanation of things.
Hmm.
But really, when we look at the one thing we have to do, just a kind of quick public service announcement, is we have to get away from the language of positive and negative emotions.
Hmm.
All human beings have the same 7 universal emotions.
Yeah.
Everybody has anger. The question is, do I have a destructive relationship? So it's either, is it destructive or constructive? That would be another way to say react and respond, actually.
Hmm.
But so anger isn't the problem. It's how I react or how I respond to anger when it arises in my experience. And so that because so then basically what happens is, and I have a whole program on this, is emotional intelligence is all skill based. It's
Hmm.
all skills, and it's all mindfulness skills. It's like, like if I'm really pissed off at my kids, can I not yell at them? Sometimes I can,
Yeah.
sometimes I can't. And so it's about having a constructive emotional episode. Now, the other thing that people don't realize, this is anger because it's a good one. You can have too much anger can be destructive. You could have an anger deficit can also be destructive. Like there's
Absolutely.
people who walk around, they're not angry enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they let people walk over them and they don't advocate for themselves. And I mean, what is the clinical definition of depression? It's anger or rage turned inward.
Mm.
Depression is an anger deficit.
Wow.
Now that sounds weird to say, but it's like there are people out there, you probably met them. They actually would be a lot better off if they could be more fucking angry.
Yeah. True. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. No, that
Now
that.
that applies towards all the emotions. It's hyper or hypo.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get that. That's the first time hearing it, but it's like resonating so deeply in my body right now that I've got full body chills rolling through me like
I
that.
mean, what is like, okay, constructive anger? The other way to say that is just compassion.
Hmm.
Like, you can look at injustices in the world, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
injustices in the world, and we
Okay.
should be angry about some of the injustice in the world, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're
The
100%
question
right.
is, can I relate to it in a way, can I help? Can I do something that's to be helpful? Now, if I yell and scream and run around and blang and point the finger and go, these fucking people are the problem, and those people are the problem, that's not helping anybody. So
Right.
therefore, it's destructive,
Yeah. Like you said, constructive anger.
constructive anger.
Now, the other thing, if you're listening and you're not watching, if you're following along only by listening, you maybe didn't see it, but when Dave said that there's 7 core emotions, I pumped my fist because,
Yeah.
like even right here on page 303 of the book, the
Yeah.
core emotion wheel, where it funnels all those into those 6 or 7 core emotions.
Right.
So I love that. I'm so glad that you're speaking that
Yeah,
because
I just can't believe every first grader in America is not learning the 7 universal emotions. Like this is shit that makes me angry.
yeah,
Like they emotional intelligence turned into social emotional learning. And what we got out of that was we got all this kind of like left wing leaning kind of woke stuff that kind of like just turned everybody into victims. It's like they bypassed all the good stuff of emotional intelligence and kind of
mhm,
watered everybody down. And it's
right.
like, they don't teach, you could social emotional learning programs, they don't even teach the universal emotions. They also don't teach constructive and destructive because what it does is it's confrontational, but it should be. Emotions are very confrontational.
Right. Well, and I was gonna say there's no problem with confrontation.
No, well,
Confrontation
there
can
didn't have to
be
be.
right, right. Like if you like a lot of the times I use, I use metaphor all the time. And like let's take the word integrity, for example. Like
Great word.
that Latin form of it, right, talks more about the structural integrity of a building. Like
Right.
right. And so if we think of it in that terms, like tension, like a tension bridge is necessary to hold that structure up. We need tension. But
We totally
it's
need tension.
right, but it comes back to what you've been saying for the past 5 minutes about positive versus negative emotion or being constructive versus deconstructive. We can apply that to the tension that we feel in relationships or in society. that, like, we've gotten away from being able to have conversations where we both disagree, but we don't sacrifice the relationship over our disagreements.
Right. Well, it's funny you mentioned that. One of the definitions of destructive is like, let's just say you get mad at me right now and you go, you know what the hell is this Dave Smith guy? Like anything that like breaks the collaboration, like I'm not even going to talk to this guy anymore. Like that's destructive. You know what I mean? Because I'm no longer willing to collaborate with the individual anymore. They just become those people.
Yeah.
And it's super destructive because it helps zero people.
Well, and again, it's what you brought up with like what's going on with our society. And once we begin to identify, we're reinforcing that ego. So, I may be a Republican, you may be a Democrat. I'm not. Just take that off the table. But
Sure.
hypothetically, right? And so now instead of then we go one step further by reinforcing these negative constructs where we're not even willing to have a conversation with the person that's philosophically different than us.
That's right.
And by doing so, we've eliminated any middle ground where we can meet in the middle and solve problems.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. I mean, if we could get that, that's like problem 101. It happens in our personal relationships with other people, but it also happens on a macro level, on a global level. And of course, now, because we don't live in a monoculture anymore, everything's siloed out. So you can just go to the podcast or the news outlet of your choice and just hear all the things that you want to hear.
Echo chamber. Yep.
Yeah. And, so this is like, I would, and I think the big one here to just put it on the table, and Paul Ekman, the other great emotional researcher, would say this: the most destructive emotion, people think anger, fear, the most destructive emotion that we have is contempt. Because what contempt does is I assert the moral high ground. If I have contempt towards you, I assert the moral superiority, and then I have to devalue you. And, like if human beings go down, it's going to be because of the emotion of contempt.
Yeah. Are you familiar at all with, I believe it's Martin Buber, the German?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that was his whole thing, right? The
Yeah.
I, it, I, thou.
Yeah. He was a
yeah.
great philosopher. Buber's great. Yeah. A lot of people have said this, but we don't always, name it or think about it. And like, the thing that pisses me off, it's like Dan Goleman wrote the book Emotional Intelligence in 1995, sold 10 million copies worldwide. It was on the bestsellers book of the New York Times. I'm like, did anybody read the fucking thing? Everybody sort of agreed for a period of time that how important emotional intelligence was. And then we didn't try to integrate it into any of our systems. Like even social emotional learning, they tried to, but they extracted all the good stuff and they ended up with this watered down, like everybody just needs to be nice.
Yeah. And I think that you're really, again, you're circling back to one of your earlier comments about the wokeism. Like it's like, we acknowledge that the necessity of honoring and labeling and familiarizing ourselves with those emotions, but that's where we stopped. And we didn't go the additional steps, which is really where the work begins.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think that that's the reluctance to dive in to do the work about learning how to identify and work within those motions. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts on that part of emotional intelligence?
Well, the other thing is people don't understand the way the model works. So it's like, if you look at it, there's a 3-phase model of emotion. There's the trigger, the experience, and the response, right? Like, so something happens and triggers anger. Okay. Like our society is obsessed with trigger management.
Yeah.
Like we have to walk around eggshells around everybody. First of all, triggers can't be removed. Nobody wants to take responsibility for their triggers.
Right.
Which is the problem.
Oh my God.
Trigger blaming. Well, Matthew said this terrible thing and he triggered me and he triggered my trauma response. And therefore it's like everybody's been so disempowered into their trigger template. It's like you have to take responsibility for your triggers. And then you have the experience. So you trigger me, I get really angry. Then what do I do with my anger? That's my job, not your job.
Yeah.
It is not your job to help me manage my anger. And then if I can manage that anger, then I can respond constructively or destructively. So we've gotten obsessed with trigger management, which is a stupid idea. Anybody in substance abuse will tell you that. And, don't go to, it's like you walk down the grocery store, you walk down the aisle 5 and it's all beer. Like, you know what I mean? If seeing the beer is going to make you drink, you're going to drink, dude, like, cause it's everywhere. And so it's really trying to like have those skills of owning the anger and trying to respond constructively.
I use a phrase, and I guess this came out of my own, I guess, process and working with my mentors around my own triggers. And it's just that triggers are just your personal invitation to heal an unhealed part of your soul that's just crying out for healing.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
And
right. Because what you're saying is you're taking responsibility for it.
yeah. Like when
Yeah.
that person, like let's use my wife, like I believe that spouses are I'll go ahead and be a little woohoo here, but divinely manifested into your life to be that mirror for you.
Yeah.
I go so far as to call my wife my lab partner.
Yeah,
And
that's
other,
right.
yeah, like the universe says, okay, this is 10th grade science class, and you two are going to get matched up on this homework assignment, a group project, and you're going to trigger the hell out of her, and she's going to trigger the hell out of you, and your jobs are to deal with your own personal triggers.
Well, back to what you said earlier, the great analogy that I like it forces you to tune in to the structural integrity of your experience.
Mm-hmm.
To have that, that structural integrity is so foundational to the whole thing. And like the world is, as far as triggers go, the world's a loaded gun. And
Oh, God.
so, I mean, like there's that too, right? Like, so the thing about it is people don't realize that emotions arise. We're not always emotional. We're mostly not emotional. They arise when something important to my well-being is occurring. Anytime I feel something to my well-being is being compromised, then the emotion comes online. Now, that might be rightly or wrongly. Somebody gives you a dirty look at the grocery store, it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
And so you get angry or you get scared or you get shamed out by some dirty look somebody gives you at the grocery store. They didn't cause it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, no, I like to use the metaphor of you're flying like a space shuttle, for instance, and you got this big panel in front of you, and your emotions are, like the dashboard. Your emotions are
Totally.
signaling you, right? And
Well, the,
those
the
are
check engine light is what they are.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely. And you can pay attention to that, and if you choose not to pay attention to it, that's okay too. Eventually the system's going to go offline though. That's the
That's right.
deregulation. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yep,
Yeah,
the
so
engine
they're,
overheats.
they're always feeding us important signals.
Yeah, beautiful. Um what are some common emotional skill deficits that you see? Again, we're kind of hitting this, but you see people struggling with, and how does Dharma practice support healing?
Yeah, so like, okay, so let's tease that apart. That's a good question. So like for me, one of the key components to Dharma practice is the practice of mindfulness. I just want to be
Yeah.
straight about that. Like, mindfulness is sort of the structural integrity of the entire Buddhist path. Mindfulness is built in throughout the whole structure.
Mhm.
So, I don't think you can develop emotional awareness skills without mindfulness. And that's why do we focus? Well, mindfulness focuses largely on what? The breath and the body. Your polyvagal system. When you become emotional, the first place you start to feel it is in this region. Now, if you've been training yourself 30 minutes a day to pay attention to your breathing in your body, when that signal arises, you're just going to catch it.
Mhm.
And so that becomes, you need to become aware of when you've become emotional. You're like,
Mhm.
all right, something just happened and I'm pissed, I'm upset, I'm angry. I'm emotional right now. I need to be careful about what I do or what I say. Because I know when I'm emotional, I oftentimes say or do shit I regret later.
Absolutely. I guess what I have of again using a different metaphor here, but I've come to see my meditation and mindfulness practice as adding fuse to the
For
already
sure.
like it used to be that my fuse was about that big,
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't
couple
even a
millimeters.
fuse, it was a button.
Yeah, precisely. And that's what led to my arrest. My father had me arrested in 2018 because even though I was like a little bit cognizant of my emotions and I knew that I was headed towards an explosion, it was slow motion and I couldn't stop it.
Yeah, that's right.
And then and that was the reactionary, right? And so, but when I go into my mindfulness and meditation practice, I'm able to add fuse and I can just be like, okay, let's
Yeah.
quickly snuff that out before it gets too close to the explosion.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's that famous Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response, there's a gap. And
Yeah,
in that gap lies our power to choose. Mindfulness just creates the gap. You're just
precisely.
getting more gap. You're getting more gap. And then something happens. You're like, okay, okay, okay. Like, okay, I want to blow, but I don't have to. I'm not going to. So yeah, the fuse gap, same thing. I mean, if you look at the research, mindfulness just does that by itself. If you have
Mhm,
a mindfulness practice, you're gonna get more fuse just by virtue of having one. You don't have to do
mhm.
anything specifically with the mindfulness.
Nope.
And so that, yeah, that lies that power to choose, and that choice becomes freedom. It's like, does that mean I stop getting? I mean, sometimes I think when you become more mindful and you start to have more emotional intelligence, one of the things that I noticed, I was like. It's like, I was like, "I'm becoming more angry." I'm like,
Mm,
"No, I'm not becoming more angry. I've been angry. I've been this angry this much this time. I just didn't know it."
yeah, you were just feeling it.
So when you get emotional intelligence, you almost start to feel like you get a downgrade because
Mm,
you're like, "Man, I'm getting worse."
mm.
And it's like, "No, I'm not getting worse. I'm just being more aware of what was already there."
Self-aware, right? Which is really, again, that comes back to the whole emotional intelligence. I think that self-awareness is another way of saying emotional intelligence.
Well, that's right. If you have in Goleman's framework, it's like, I think there's like 4 things. He's like, self-awareness is the top of the list always,
Yeah.
like, no self-awareness, this whole emotional intelligence thing, you might as well just call it a day.
Well, that's narcissism, right?
Yeah, exactly. No self-awareness and just the blaming outward. And
Yeah.
so, mindfulness is helpful. And then Dharma practice is just a matter of like trying to intentionally develop appropriate responses. So we might say, like, well, cultivating metta or kindness, like, okay, like kindness is going to come in handy when you become emotional. Kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, those kinds of things. We can also we can cultivate awareness, but we can also cultivate responsiveness to those things where we actually, I feel like we have to do that to some degree. We have to learn how to be just kind to ourselves. I think a lot of this, I point back to the individual people. People, from what I've gathered and the people that I've worked with over the last 15 years, people are just generally not very kind to themselves.
Mhm.
They don't have a lot of self compassion. And like that's going to be, do you really want to walk around with that rock in your shoe for the rest of your life?
Yeah, sure. I wanted to can we expand on that?
Yes.
This is something that I will say that I'm unsure of. Is, I guess, a working philosophy, but from your perspective, is my ability to extend, let's say, any of those virtues, love, compassion, generosity, empathy, to another person equal to the ability to extend it to myself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the big misunderstandings is, especially if you go into like a Buddhist or an insight retreat center, where you will learn what are called Brahma Vihara practices. You'll learn these four: kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity, is that they're generally taught to be kind of sent outward,
Mhm.
which is not wrong, but what happens is they actually got to go this way. Like, the great quote by Mother Teresa: "Charity begins at home."
Mhm.
And so people don't do that. They really like, I'll work with people. I'll have them do kindness practice for themselves for a year.
Wow.
Now you need to do this every other day for a year, and that's just the way it's going to be. And so if the kindness I have for myself has been established, then the kindness I have for you is going to be more authentic.
Yeah.
Where if I don't have it for myself, I might be kind to you because I want to get something out of you, or like I want you to
Mhm.
like me. It a lot of times can be transactional or it can be delusional. It's not being kind for kindness sake. It's like, okay, this guy invited me to this podcast. I really want him to like me. So I'm going to be kind to him, which is not bad, but it's also like not really misses the point. So it's always trying to get those four qualities established in mindfulness practice.
Yeah.
And then if we can do that, which is not doesn't take that long, then the project of all this stuff becomes a lot more rich and a lot more responsive. If I don't have self-compassion, if I don't have any compassion for my pain, the compassion I have for your pain is going to be kind of weak at best.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that that's I mean that's like I said, it's a working philosophy that I've been thinking about for a long time, and I do really believe that it really starts with oneself, and then once you well, not wherever you are in that process of mastery is the level at which you can extend it to others.
And people don't want to do these practices because at first they are a little bit uncomfortable. They can feel a little bit contrived. There's not a great system to do it. You oftentimes offer phrases or do these things, but it's like people wait too long. It's like, whatever the learning curve is, you got to get over.
I just want to share one thing with the audience, and then you can add to that. For anybody who's hearing this for the first time and kind of scratching their heads about where and how to begin a mindfulness practice, like my advice would be don't overthink it, don't overcomplicate it. It can be as simple as downloading a breathwork app on your phone and following that.
I think that's right. I actually, as somebody who's got many mixed feelings about the phone, that is one thing where the phone can be helpful. It's like there's a lot of really good mindfulness apps. And if you don't know what to do, just put the headphones on and just find one and follow along. And if you find one you like, do it every day for a year. You don't have to, I've been listening to the same bands for 30 years. It's like, it's okay. You listen to the same song over and over again. If you find a couple that you like, just do them. And I think that's one of the benefits of the digital realm is there's lots of good stuff out there. And you just have to look around, and if you find a couple that you like, if you find an app that you like, you can just kind of work with it. Eventually you can do it on your own. But it is for people who are homeschoolers, which is probably most people. It's a really a good place to begin.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there is a real barrier um, to that lost masculine embracing mindfulness or meditation for whatever reasons. And it's really, I think a lot of us are resistant to it from a place of overcomplicating it. So
For sure.
yeah, men out there, seriously, find an app. Just learn how to breathe and be in touch with your bodies first, and again, start for 5 minutes. If you can manage
Totally.
5 minutes, yeah, and expand. Okay, next question. What are some of the common, and we've been talking about skill set. I love that because you're setting up the
It's all
next
skills,
question.
man.
Yeah, what are some of the skill deficits that you see most people struggling with?
Well, there's a lot of them. I think what it is the way to say this would be the skill deficit is that most people are what we would call hypercognitive.
Mm,
They're smart, they have information, they want knowledge. And it's like when it comes to this emotional stuff, the cognitive, this is Goleman's kind of assessment, like having a high IQ doesn't guarantee emotional happiness. So because we're so information heavy, people think they just go, give me the information, give me the information. And it's like, because of the hypercognition aspect of it, then the primary metaphor would be like, you might know that, but you don't know how.
mhm.
I know that my anger gets me in trouble all the time, but I don't know how to reverse that. Skill sets about learning is about knowing how, knowing how to, have more resilience in adversity, learning how to, you know, not make that comment to your wife when you're upset. Like a lot of these are skills that you develop and having the information. Like I know, from a Buddhist background, like I know that everything changes. I believe in impermanence. But when I'm faced with real change in my life, do I always know how to manage it? No, I don't actually. And so a lot of that is, I think people don't, I think there's just a laziness factor that people just don't want to learn the skills.
Yeah.
It's like, I've been overweight for 25 years, you know what I mean? I know exactly what I need to do. We all do. Everybody knows.
Yeah.
They're like, well, they think you're going to do the kettlebell challenge or what's the right this, what's the right that. It's like, no, dude, you need to eat less and move more. I mean, that's it. But knowing that and knowing how to do it are very, very different things. And I think we need to have a more of a I don't know how to, and I want to learn how to.
Yeah.
And then from there, there's a whole bunch of things like discipline and mindfulness. But you have to dedicate time, which means you have to do less time doing other things. And it's kind of a time management thing. And probably what the number one thing people could do is put their goddamn phone down.
Yeah. I'm reminded of a couple of sayings in what you were saying there. The first one is, knowledge is knowing that tomatoes are fruit. Wisdom is not putting them in a fruit salad.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah,
then
exactly.
the other thing that struck me is that you talked about like having a high IQ is no guarantee for internal happiness. And yesterday I was in a public building and a group of mentally handicapped children came by and they were passing out Valentine's cookies to everybody in the building. And I thought, that there is like, that was the embodiment of pure joy, those kids. I was like,
Exactly.
it touched my heart. So, and you could almost say that it's the inverse correlation between sometimes a
It
high
is.
IQ.
I mean, that was the big kind of finding that made the emotional intelligence book, is that like being intellectually or having an IIQ was not a measurement for success in society at all. And it definitely wasn't a measure for success in relationships. In fact, a lot of times, yeah, and that's why Daniel Goleman got into the business world, is like, like being, having empathy, all these things. Actually, I think one of his tricks was he was able to convince the business world that actually emotional intelligence was better for the bottom line.
They just didn't embrace it.
No, they did. Well, some people did, but I think mostly that ball rolled down the hill a long time ago.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with you. I think that it is, well, I would go so far as to say that it is in every scenario, in every setting, the greater the emotional intelligence, the greater the likelihood of the positive outcome. But it seems like leaders on all levels and in all categories have sort of embrace a capitalist scarcity mindset, and
That's right.
everything is competitive.
Everything's competitive, and it's us and them, and we need to win.
Yeah, at the expense of others. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, it's really, yeah, boy, that book's probably more relevant now than it was when it came out.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Okay. Can you describe some practical exercises for building that emotional resilience? We've already touched on a couple, but if you'd like
Yeah,
to recap.
I think, of course, I think most people could and should be able to sit doing a morning meditation, 5 days a week for 15 or 20 minutes. I think everybody has the time to do that. That right there would be a game changer.
Mm,
There's other things you can do that aren't as obvious. Like, for example, you can keep, like, for a couple weeks, you can keep like an emotional episode journal, where at the end of the day, you just write down, things that happened during the day that you would classify like, did anything, you could just start with anger. What happened today? When did I become angry today? And you write down that, and you write what happened, what the outset was, what the result was. And but what having an emotional journal helps you understand, like, it gives you more like, oh, because people think, well, I didn't have a very emotional day. But then you think about it, you're like, okay, what happened? I got scared. I was almost, I almost got in a car accident. That was scary. What was going on there? And so there's a lot of ways in which we can become a little bit more aware of these emotion episodes. The other thing too is, like, I think there's just a lot of education. I think we can better educate. I'll have to give you the link, but there's a website called Atlas of Emotions, which
okay.
has a lot of great stuff. And I think everybody should know what the 7 universal emotions are. They should know their emotional profile. Are you a guy who tends towards anger, or you tends towards fear? What emotions do you feel like you don't have any experience? And for men, usually men are usually really good at anger and terrible at sadness.
Mm, mm,
And if you can't, and we can also realize that you can use anger you can use one emotion to regulate all the other ones. And I think, the masculinity kind of complaint that people have, I don't like the word toxic masculinity either. I think it's terrible. But there's a way in which, like, a man can use anger to regulate all the other emotions, and it appears like a strong leader because he's angry. It's like, well, that's not true. And so it's being able to understand your emotional profile. Like, you can do autobiographies. Like, I could sit down with you. Okay, Matthew, write me a one-page story about angry Matthew. Write me a one-page story
mm,
about scared Matthew. Write me a one-page story about sad Matthew. And so that way you get a little bit of your narrative on that. Which story's easier to write? Which one's harder to write? And
mm.
realizing that all the stories are a little bit different,
Yeah, yeah.
because we're
Wow.
always telling ourselves stories about things.
We are. We are. That's that internal monologue. I love that. Those are some really great suggestions. I hope that the audience will try those. And additionally, I'll put the links to the atlas and to the 7 emotions in the description below.
Yeah, they're in the atlas. It's really, really good. And there's a lot of things, and also even doing something as simple as a gratitude list.
Mm.
Anything that you can do that invites us into that emotional space is always going to give us good returns.
Let me bounce this off of you. I'll tell everybody. I'll go ahead and go open kimono here and just like be share my mindfulness practice with you. I'll let you rate it but then share it with the audience. So I like to start with a guided meditation in the morning. Actually, it's prayer and meditation. I usually do a 15-minute meditation. At night, I go to the sauna and I'll
Nice.
do I try to get at least 30 to 45 minutes of breath work during the sauna in. And then as I'm going to sleep, I will do a gratitude practice where I will just run through all the things in my mind that I'm generally or specifically that day grateful for as I'm kind of drifting into that sleep space.
That's great. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of mindfulness can be a little bit dry, and I think wetting it up a little bit's good. It's like doing some gratitude lists or just reminding ourselves, some practices you can do is like, just take on for like a month, just try to do one random act of kindness a day and just see what that feels like,
Wow. Yeah, that's a good one.
you know?
Especially, yeah, we should bookmark that one for the audience to try and actually, just I'll put this out there. Like for anybody who is hearing these, we want to invite you to try them, all of them or some of them, but whichever ones you do, please comment, share with us, let us know
Cool.
how that goes. We'd love to hear from that. Okay, next question: how do you use Dharma practices to inform addiction recovery and trauma healing? This is something I'm really excited to hear about.
Mm,
Because you talked about your sobriety. Anybody who knows me knows I'm sober. I
yeah.
had a long history. I was introduced to alcohol, I think the age of 13. Yeah, it was 13. And I had a real battle up until 2021. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the addiction space for as long as I've been in any of the other spaces, and it's funny you did it and they do it a lot, but I just want to make a plug. I think there's been a mistake in addiction treatment, and I think like you never hear the word addiction without the word trauma anymore.
Hmm.
They become so correlated, and I think that there's been some unintended consequence of that have been problematic.
Okay.
I have addiction and I have trauma, um, and so but they're not always the same thing, and they're not always connected. And there's been a modern discourse around like until you heal your trauma, you can't break free from addiction. And I think that that's a mistake. I got sober long before I even dealt with my trauma. People in
Hmm.
Alcoholics Anonymous got sober for 100 years. Thousands, millions of people got sober without dealing with trauma. This is a recent invention. And so the reason I think one of the big problems with that, back to the stuff we talked about earlier about confrontation, is when we have a loved one or someone, when somebody's really struggling with addiction and really destroying their lives or robbing or stealing, like we really have to we're no longer willing to really confront people about the behavior and be like, "Hey, man, you need to stop." And it's gotten to this conversation, "Well, I can't stop because I have trauma."
Mm.
And so it's disempowered people, and it's given people a little bit of a kind of get out of jail free card for shitty behavior. And one thing about Alcoholics Anonymous that was so great was the tremendous emphasis on taking responsibility for your actions. I'm not saying bad things didn't happen to you. I'm not dismissing any of that. I'm just saying like you can take responsibility for your actions regardless of what you've been through. People do it all the time.
Yeah.
And so that's a big thing that's kind of been sidestepped in the addiction treatment world, because the hallmark of addiction is what? Denial.
Yeah.
People who have addiction, they have denial. And then and there's this way of like taking responsibility for your life. And now when you do that and you see that you can do that, that's really the most beautiful thing about recovery is people, they wake up to the suffering, they wake up to the pain, they wake up to the confusion. They're like, I can't live like this anymore.
Which brings us full circle with what we talked about with, like not trying to run away from our suffering.
Exactly.
It means sitting with it and being okay with it and not using substances or activities to mask those feelings, to
Yeah.
get enough dopamine to drown it out.
And what has softened the language around it is people using their suffering or their trauma as an excuse for all of these. Like, well, I can't help it. I can't stop doing this terrible thing because I have this other thing. And then that's become almost encouraged in some spaces.
Which also feels very parallel to what we were saying about having enough emotional intelligence to label our triggers so that we can use them, weaponize them against others,
Exactly.
and not doing the follow-on work of eliminating or working through our triggers. It feels the same like with the addiction conversation. It's like, well, I can't get sober because I know enough about my trauma now that I'm not going to take any responsibility for it. I'm just going to use it as an excuse.
Well, that's exactly right. That's the unintended consequence of all of
Yeah.
this, which I think has really helped to know people at all. Like you, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find an addiction treatment program that doesn't have trauma on the front page of the website. They've become so conflated that I think that we've done it. I think that some of the old school ways we used to do addiction recovery were actually a lot better and a lot more effective. And to just weave back in the emotion piece, because this has kind of been my argument the whole way down the line, is if we talk about something like, well, post-traumatic stress, let's just talk about that for a second. The stress, what is the stress in post-traumatic stress? Every time we feel stress, every time the structural integrity of the building is being compromised, it's
Mhm.
emotion.
Yeah.
When you're feeling stress, what you're feeling is emotion. So what's happening in the system of the traumatized person, what's actually going on is there's an emotional component. And they even say this, that trauma is about emotional dysregulation.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, why don't we just like take that seriously for a moment and forget about the biography and what you went through and all this trauma narrative business and just help people with emotional regulation? If the problem is emotional regulation, then let's help people with emotional regulation. Let's include that into the package and say, we're going to help you with that because that's actually the problem. And so what that does is it bypasses the ability to weaponize triggers. It bypasses all this soft languaging around things to say, actually, you need to take responsibility for your triggers because your triggers are going to ruin your life.
Yeah. Which brings us right back to, well, I don't want to say it that way, which reinforces the need for mindfulness and meditation practice, because that's one of the other components of, not only are we, well, or maybe that's just the same way of saying we're lengthening that fuse, right?
That's
To
right.
allow us the time to become more emotionally regulated with our anger, our sadness, or whatever else, right? That's why
So
you're
what? So
saying,
what? So what does real trauma resolution look like? What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about skills.
yeah,
We're talking about skills. That's what they need. They need people with trauma need skills that they don't have. That's what they need. Let's just give them the skills, and let's see if we can just. We can talk about what you went through. I'm happy to open up the can of worms and talk about as much or as little as you want, but it's not that important actually.
I agree. And the other thing I was going to ask you about this too is, I know, I mean, you and I have both been in those circles. We've sat in those rooms, and, usually a shitty church basement with shitty coffee and stale donuts is how I
Change
remember
your
them.
life, man.
Yeah,
And let's be
right,
honest. No charge.
right.
No charge.
Maybe 50 cents in the coffee
Dollar in a
can,
jar will change your life.
Yeah. But I know that I came across people in those circles who, by and large, and there was an exception, right? The majority, I think you'd agree, would seem to identify with some trauma, but there were those that were just, they had great lives until they got a hold of alcohol or
Totally,
drugs.
dude.
And they weren't full of trauma. They hadn't seen anybody killed. They weren't beat as a child. They didn't go to war. They
Yeah,
just, they,
yeah, that's right. You almost can't say that anymore because of people like Gabor Mate and Johan Hari, these kind of people who need to go to an Al-Anon meeting. It's like, they'll actually say like addiction is 100% childhood trauma. It's like, wow, that's a bold statement. Like I met
Mhm.
many people in the rooms who are like, I had a great childhood. I went to college. I started drinking a lot of beer and doing cocaine, and I liked it too much.
Yeah,
There's even
yeah,
an argument to
exactly.
be made of some people with addiction. They didn't have enough of adversity.
Mhm.
Shit was
Yeah,
too easy, and they
yeah,
got bored.
exactly.
They got
True.
bored, and they got daddy's credit card, and they burned it down.
Yep, yep, and by the time they realized they were hooked, it was too late.
Too late.
Yeah.
So, I'm also I'm not a fan of all. I don't believe that there is, like, when you start getting into language of like, what is the cause of addiction? There is actually no singular cause. That's a fool's errand. There's contributing factors,
Mhm, mhm.
you know. My dad drank. Is that a contributing factor? Probably. Is that the reason why? No, it's not. There's no one singular. That's the problem with the trauma space. They want to reduce it to a singular cause, and it's just a fool's errand. There's a whole bunch of things that probably contributed to that. And actually,
Yeah.
knowing the cause is not going to help. It's not going to give you the know-how.
No, no, it's almost a mood issue. Like
Yeah, exactly.
like,
Well, I know how
would
I burnt the house down, it doesn't matter because the house is burnt to the ground.
Right. Or maybe I know how the fire started. What I really need is the skill set to put it out before the house is burned down.
Exactly.
I know how
The
I
focus is we become focused on the wrong things.
yeah. I really one of the things that I really appreciate about this conversation so far and what you're saying, Dave, is that a couple of things. One is it's rooted in some, what I would call extreme responsibility. I don't know if you're familiar with oh geez, I can't think of his name right now. Wilnick, the Navy SEAL.
Okay.
Yeah, but he preaches extreme ownership.
Yeah,
As
sure.
as leadership, and that was one of the things that was core for us in special operations, was we would take extreme ownership of a situation. Like,
Yeah.
anything that went right was the responsibility and to the dedication of those that, my
Mhm.
subordinates. Anything that went wrong, that fell on me, right? That's extreme
That's
ownership.
right. That's right. Yeah, I think we've lost a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I think people are paying a fee for that because, that's where we get like, in AA or in Dharma, time we get any kind of faith or courage, it's always rooted in an idea that somehow is empowering, not disempowering.
Yeah.
Like sometimes we think that that's too militant, this kind of thing you're saying. Oh, it's like putting too much onus on. It's like, no, it's empowering people saying, you know what, like you can do this.
Yeah.
And that's why I push back. I'm always the own example of this. It's like there was all this stuff of like, people with PTSD shouldn't sit these long mindfulness retreats. I'm like, dude, I had clinical grades of symptoms of PTSD and I sat 10-day retreats all through the 90s. Was it hard? Was it brutal? Yeah, it was really hard. It was really challenging. You know what? I think it did me some good.
Yeah, I
So
think
there's
so.
sort of like until you resolve your trauma, you kind of can't do anything. That's bullshit.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I think you do it in spite of your trauma. Or
Well, that's right.
actually, you do it because of your trauma.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, I love the extreme ownership aspect of it. And the
Also,
second
these are very unpopular things to be talking about.
they very yeah, like, and that's the problem. That is the problem right there,
Yeah.
is that, like, nobody is talking about extreme ownership, nobody wants to talk about work,
Yeah.
and nobody wants to talk about skill sets.
No, no, because you have to do that yourself.
Yeah, in fact, I will tell you, like, I work in I guess what I would call an adjacent field, like, helping people to find plant medicine ceremonies for all their things, whatever they are. And I will, and I beat this drum all day long, and I say, listen, the ceremony is nothing. It is the least important part. Like we were talking about, earlier with Ram Dass, saying it's a gateway. All it is a gateway, and what comes next is the most important part, and that is
That's
the
right.
30 days of neuroplasticity, where you go to work and you have to build new lifestyle skills that sustain you for a lifetime, because you can't keep coming to ceremony.
Right. Yep.
So, yeah, like 100%, like everything you're saying with me,
I think things
saying,
are swinging back this way a little bit, actually.
I do too. Yeah, yeah. I think that people are learning from finding an empty well, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just keep digging and digging, and they're like, "There's nothing in this for like I gotta." Again, it's like the Stoicism: if it holds water, we'll keep it, we'll retain it. If it's
That's right.
bullshit, let's toss
We're
it
gonna
out.
let it go.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Next question: how can mindfulness practitioners avoid the trap of using meditation solely as an escape for emotional discomfort? And I think we're kind of hitting on this, but let's elaborate.
I understand that question. I think it's okay if you do, actually, to some degree.
Mm, okay.
Like
Yeah.
I think that like there's a word they use now, like for around for a little called spiritual bypass, which is kind of what I think what you're speaking to. It's like, you know what, if you use mindfulness a little bit for a while to avoid some painful shit, like, okay, well, that's better than drinking a bottle.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I understand the question, but I think to some degree we have to be a little bit more forgiving and a little bit more humble of like we're probably going to be doing some of that anyway. And it would be really foolish to not begin in the first place because of the fear of that.
Yeah. You
It's
know,
like, well, how am I gonna, I don't want to use my mindfulness to, I'm like, don't worry, like whatever you're avoiding on one end, on the other side of it, you're going to get plenty of it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. When you start developing a mindfulness practice, you're going to get plenty of pain that you're not going to be able to run from. So whatever little bit that you think you can, that's all right.
yeah. That's another thing. What you're saying to me also aligns with me, and let me throw this construct out and get your feedback. I believe that like level one of managing our emotions, at least for me, let me speak to, as it pertains to me. My first level of managing my emotions was at the backhand of my father saying, "If you don't stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about." So
Oh
I
yeah,
learned how to stuff it down, right?
totally.
And then when that didn't work enough, that's when I got, access to things like alcohol and drugs, right? And so then I began to mask it. Then through my plant medicine journey, I substituted, alcohol and opioids for cannabis and mushrooms.
Yep.
And I was managing that way. I don't even use those now. Like I am just
Yeah.
in mindfulness and meditation and other lifestyle things. So I think again, yeah, like where we have to be willing to meet people where they're at, and wherever they're
Right.
at is where they're at. Like there's,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's where like a harm reduction strategy, which I don't like as an addiction treatment protocol, but like, in the longer term thing, it's like, okay, like let's be a little bit gracious over here because we're trying to focus on this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're looking at
So
the
it's like,
journey, the whole journey.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You're gonna, it's like, you're better off. You're maybe doing something that's somewhat destructive, but at least you're getting into less harmful stuff.
I want to open up this next question to give us more insight to your specific practice and offerings. What does your mentor program differ? How does your mentor program differ from a typical meditation class in terms of depth and transformation?
Yeah, I kind of went from having a Johnny Appleseed mentality, like, well, for years and years I just taught and went everywhere I could teach. And my general kind of personal preference nowadays is I'm much more interested in taking a smaller group of people way further.
Mm.
Where I used to just teach all the, and I still do a little bit, but so mentoring is more about having a one-on-one relationship with a teacher that you can kind of deepen your practice over time. Also meeting other people in the same cohort, so there's a community aspect to it. And then it's really trying to lab partner, like trying to help you get to where you want to go. And it's different for everybody. It's not like everybody's doing the same program. It's trying to get the people to get to the place in their life where they want to go and trying to kind of foster that. So it's not therapy in the sense of like we're trying to solve problems. We're celebrating success as much as we are trying to work on stuff that needs to be challenged. Probably the overarching thing with is trying to use these practices to cultivate or develop a meaningful life as much as you can with the challenges that you have. And that's kind of unique and different for everybody. So as individuals, we kind of craft that along one by one. And then we have these meetings on Sunday, and then I have retreats around the country. So my interest always now at this point is trying to develop long-term relationships, whether it's with students or teachers, or even like different retreat centers. Like I try to go to the same place, the same time every year,
Mhm.
deep dig a deeper hole with less people, just because I find that to be more interesting and more meaningful to me. Is you get to know people's journey a little bit more way rather than just like, I used to do this a lot. I don't do it that much anymore. I'd get invited to teach meditation at some center in Los Angeles, and I'd kind of go in and I'd do a talk for 100 people that I don't know, and maybe they'd give me some questions. I never see them again. They never see me again. It just doesn't have as much. I'm not that interested in that kind of thing as much as I want.
Yeah, but yeah, again, I think that we all just, the journey is the journey. But what I hear you saying now is that you're just in a place of much deeper alignment and intimate relationships and deeper roots. And
Yeah.
yeah, I
Well,
love that.
that's why I think like this is great. This podcast is great. I have a podcast. It's great because I can use my podcast as a way to kind of I just can throw it out into the world and it lands where it lands. And every once in a while, somebody will email me and we'll connect, and it's great. So the podcast world allows me to also do that, but also allows me to do it from the inside my house, and then that helps me kind of develop these and fine tune these more depth relationships, whether it's with people, teachers, students, or really in many ways, a lot of times it's kind of retreat centers that kind of that teach and offer stuff that's kind of in my wheelhouse around kind of mindfulness and early Buddhism and insight, for the lack of a better.
Yeah. What's your philosophy? And I think again, we're kind of touching on these things as we go just
Yeah.
ahead. But what's your philosophy on community versus individual practices, especially for long-term integration?
It's hard. It's tricky because people, in Buddhism they use this word sangha. People want to join a sangha, right? It's like, but it's not like going, it's not like you join a gym, you know what I mean? It's not that easy. Finding quality community is really hard. It's really hard, and it's not that easy, and people need to be more careful. In fact, to be honest with you, I think, like, for me in the last 30 years, the most accessible, reliable, the trustworthy community is 12-step meetings. I mean, you live in Salt Lake, there's probably 200 meetings a day, you know?
Probably.
They're all free, and so addicts have the advantage of that kind of fellowshipping thing. But I find with other communities, I feel like you almost have to handpick it.
Hmm.
You have to find, one or two like-minded people, and you kind of add slowly. It's a very, very long, slow road. But you can go to like IMS or Spirit Rock or Viacitas. You can go to these kind of Buddhist retreat centers, and you go sit a 7-day retreat with 50 people that you don't know, and you connect with like one or two of them or three or four of them, and you establish. I think it's just something that happens, unfortunately, a lot slower than we probably want it to.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
And also, then there's also the cult phenomenon. You got to watch out for that shit.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
not
true.
everybody, and my pushback on this too, it's like I'm not for everybody, and I'm probably not for most,
Yeah.
but not everybody who is in this space is trustworthy, man.
Same with MySpace. It's really tricky.
There's a lot of like really greedy there's a lot of unskillful people out there. And if you're like online looking at Dharma podcasts or looking at a retreat schedule, like it's hard. So if you find somebody you resonate with, and I would just say listen, read their books, listen to their talks, because not everybody's for everybody. And you have to find one or two teachers or people who lead the stuff that you like. And that can be hard. It can be time consuming.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking back on your own evolution as a teacher, how has your perspective shifted over the years and where do you see your work going next?
A lot. I which sometimes has the pros and cons, because when you change your mind a lot on perspectives, you can sometimes appear being a little wishy-washy. But, well, you used to say this, and now you're saying that, and now you're doing this other thing. And like, it's important to have somewhat of a consistent message, but it's also important to be open-minded, to be like, I don't actually think that way anymore.
Yeah.
I used to say this, but now I don't think that's actually true anymore. Now I think it's like this. So I always find about every 5 years, I end up having to tear it down and start over again,
Mm,
which I did not that long ago. What happens is you start to, you teach a lot, you read a lot, you start to develop your ideas to the point where you almost start to you become ideological, and you almost even start developing your own dogma. And I
mm,
don't see any way out of that. I'm probably doing it a little bit right now. So I just have to be aware of that and be like, okay, I'm getting too tight around this. And you get to like, oh, this is the correct way. This is the right, correct way. And then you end up getting to the point where you do that to the point of dissatisfaction. You're like, okay, I need to break it all down and start over again, which is kind of the way that it works for me. But then what happens is you end up realizing there is a set of ideas that sit at the bottom of it that you kind of always, every time you fall off the cliff, you always fall back into the same pond. And then, so as you rebuild, you rebuild differently. And you're almost kind of repackaging the same stuff over and over again anyway,
mhm,
which is probably okay. But I looked at Stephen Batchelor years ago. I just learned the one thing that served me the most is I've learned how to follow my own nose,
mm.
where I'm just kind of like watching. I'm like, well, I'm just following what seems interesting or what feels relevant. And I just trust that by doing that the outcome is going to be favorable. And it always is.
Sure, sure. Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up here.
Nice.
I want to just do a couple things. First of all, I'll say some closing remarks. We'll do some sponsorship and then over to you for final comments. But
Cool.
Dave, like this podcast, this episode has really resonated with me, has really helped me frame some context and some philosophy, helped me to like just, I don't know, feel really comfortable with a lot of the things that I was hoping to hear and feel from you. So just huge gratitude to you and for your
Well,
time
thank you.
and thankfulness. Again, we want to again thank our sponsor, Olipop. If you're fighting that battle with
My son
soda,
loves those.
yeah, they're so good for us. And again, they steer clear of the sugars and the artificial sweeteners. So we want to give them a shout out. And then again, Larabelle and the Crazy Tree.
I love it.
Yep. A story about embracing your authenticity and being courageous as an emerging adolescent. So all of these can be found at Amazon. And then the final one is From Green Beret to Shamanism, One Man's Journey to Heal. I'll get with you afterwards.
How old is that book now, Matthew?
This one,
Yeah.
it came out on Veterans Day. So
So it's recent.
very recent. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm going to send you a copy, Dave.
I love it. That'd be great. I love to check it out. My dad will be psyched to see it too, I bet.
Awesome. All right. So over to you for any final comments or thoughts.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, the big thing is if you want to find out anything more about me, maybe you can put it in the notes. It's just
Absolutely.
davesmithdharma.com on Spotify, iTunes, podcasts. I also have another organization called Secular Dharma Foundation. Send this to you because we have a free series called the Lecture and Dialogue series. And the next one we're doing is a conversation on trauma and addiction. It's really going to unpack what I mentioned before. And there's a link, you can just sign up and it's on Zoom. It's free. You can just kind of come and check out the conversation. And we record it and post it later. But both Dave Smith Dharma and Secular Dharma Foundation do have podcasts and stuff, and just kind of a boatload of free resources if you want to just listen to more about this stuff. There's a lot of free stuff out there that you can check out. And if you feel so inclined, you can always reach out and email me and see where that takes you.
And I'll also share those. We have an internal community of those who've gone through our program that we share good information with all the time. So I'll share those in there as well too. Cool.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Dave. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate all the work that you're doing to help the masculine and everybody, but particularly us lost masculines who need a little lift up. So thanks for being on the
next time in
podcast.
Salt Lake, I'll send you a note, man. We can grab a coffee or something.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you.
All right, Matthew,
Okay, we're stopped.